Hello, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this latest in my series of St. John's Pipecasts. Today I will seek to expound the essential arguments of the German philosopher Martin Heidegger's 1927 book, Being and Time. This is, I realise, a rather ambitious objective. Heidegger's book is notoriously dense, and he develops his ideas in a new and idiosyncratic language. For the purpose of clarity, I've tried to distill the essential arguments of the work and present these in a logical and structured form. I'm sure many will take issue with my interpretation, but it is the best I can do, and I hope it is of some assistance to those seeking to navigate their way through Heidegger's unfamiliar landscape. What then is being and time about? Now, Heidegger states that he is seeking to inquire into the meaning of being. This definition, of course, raises as many questions as it answers. There are two obviously particularly problematical words, meaning and being. Let us start with being. We are all familiar with the entities around us, the objects of our world. The study of entities as they appear in the world, Heidegger called ontological inquiry. This is the kind of inquiry typified by science. But Heidegger wanted to go beyond these observed entities and understand what it means for an entity to exist at all. What is the nature of the being which underlies the diverse entities of appearance? Heidegger was asking not what it means to exist as a particular entity, cup, tree, or human being, but what does it mean for any entity to be? What is the being of all beings? The second problematic word is meaning. When Heidegger asks what is the meaning of being, what is he getting at? Now, Magda King, in her Heidegger's Philosophy, writes that by the meaning of something, Heidegger is referring to that from which something is understandable as the thing that it is. The meaning of a thing is the ground or condition that makes that thing understandable. In everyday life, that ground is the use or function of things. The meaning of this object is a hammer, because as a hammer, this configuration of wood and steel is used as a hammer to knock in nails into a piece of wood, for example. The ground of a hammer, therefore, is the craftwork of building. But the craftwork of building only has meaning when referred to the activity of humans in building things. So to understand the ultimate meaning of the objects that surround us, we must situate them within the human world in which they are part. If this human world were to vanish, leaving only the objects, then visitors from another planet could ascribe no meaning to the objects lying around, since the use function they possessed would have ceased to exist. The world within which things have meaning, Heidegger called their horizon. Thus, the horizon of everyday objects is the practical uses to which they are put. The meaning of scientific concepts like mass, protons, and energy is the horizon of science within which they are used. Hence, to ask the question, what is the meaning of being, is to ask, what is the horizon of being? What is the foundation to which you must refer to understand being itself? Not the being of a particular thing, the hammer as hammer, but the being of a thing in general, being as being. Now, such an inquiry takes us from the appearance of entities, the ontological level, to the underlying reality of being, which is the condition of anything existing at all. The pursuit of the underlying nature of things is what Heidegger calls ontology. To pose the question, what does it mean for an entity to be, is to pose an ontological question about the underlying nature of things beyond the world of appearances. Now, to get beyond the appearance of entities to the ultimate meaning of their being seems a daunting task. But Heidegger believed there was a route to being, and it ran through human beings. In one sense, human beings are entities in the world like any other, but humans possess a unique quality. They can reflect upon their being. The consciousness of human beings causes them to reflect upon what it is meant for them to be. What is the meaning of life? What are the foundations of experience? And so forth. Heidegger proposes then to analyse what it means for a human being to exist, as a preliminary to analysing what it means for anything to exist. By introspection, we can possibly uncover our being, what it means for us to be. And once we have laid bare what it means for a human to be, then it seems to follow that we have laid bare what it means for things in general to be. This is why Being and Time is an inquiry into human being. The human being was to be the key that will unlock the problem of being in general. In practice, this is not how things turned out. Studying human existence turns out to be a great way to understand human existence. In the end, it appears to tell us little about existence or the being of other non-thinking entities. For it needs to be understood that despite his ambition to understand the meaning of being as such, this is not something Heidegger achieves in Being and Time. What he in fact does is analyse what it means for human beings to exist. The book as it stands is an existential analytic of what it means to be a human in the world. In this sense, Being and Time was a heroic failure. Only the first part of Heidegger's planned work, the section on human existence and being, was completed. The second part, on the meaning of being in general, was never written. Perhaps it never could be written. Perhaps an inquiry into the meaning of being in general was wholly misconceived. Yet this detracts little from the value of Being and Time. For the question that it does consider, namely what it means for a human being to exist in the world, is profoundly important. And what Heidegger says about human existence is remarkable for the brilliance with which he analyses so many things we take for granted. No one before had ever written such a book about what it means for a human to exist, and for this reason alone, we continue to return to it. Now, although we have talked about human beings and human experience, Heidegger does not usually use the word human. Rather, he uses the term Dasein. Dasein means being there, the being there of a conscious human in the world. One defining feature of Dasein is that it is a unique conscious entity that poses questions about what it means to be. A second defining feature of Dasein is its existence. Dasein exists in a peculiarly dynamic, self-defining way. The way it exists, the life it leads, is a product of the choices it makes. Dasein makes itself through its actions, and every Dasein is correspondingly unique. This for Heidegger is not true of a pebble, a tree, or a mouse. Objects and animals just are, and are defined by their place in nature, their species type, and so on. Dasein is different, in that its species type does not define it. Its choices and actions define it. In Sartre's phrase, man's existence precedes his essence. Now, Heidegger's phenomenological method is to analyse the everyday experience of Dasein in order to arrive at the necessary a priori conditions that make human experience possible. What he asks us to do is grasp what it means for us to have experience of being in the world, and then ask, what are the preconditions that make that experience possible, the horizon within which its meaning can be understood? There's an important echo here of Kant. Kant had determined the a priori categories that make coherent experience possible, notably time, space, causality, and substance. These categorical concepts were necessary, argued Kant, for sensory experience to be meaningful and yield scientific knowledge. What Heidegger does is shift the idea of a priori necessary elements of experience from abstract experience to everyday human lived experience. What are the conditional elements necessary for humans to have experience of the world? In this way, Heidegger hoped to go from everyday experience to the fundamental structure of authentic human experience, and from this to infer the meaning of what it means to be a human in the world. What, in other words, can the lived experience of Dasein tell us about the being of Dasein? Thus, Heidegger's approach to understanding the nature of being lies through the everyday life of humans, rather than the kind of abstract theoretical reflection philosophers typically engaged in. What he wished to do was get out of the study and the library and tackle what it means to be humans by interrogating the actual day-to-day experience of humans in the world. The unifying concept that captures what it means for Dasein to exist, Heidegger argued, is care. Dasein cares about being in the world. Now, by care, Heidegger means that humans consider the external world to be significant, something they notice, are affected by, are watchful of, something they are never indifferent towards. Humans always have an attitude towards the world. Humans exhibit what Heidegger calls concernful circumspection to the world around them, noting what objects are about them, what risks and dangers there are, what is happening, and so forth. With respect to other persons, other Daseins, Heidegger says that Dasein feels solicitude towards them, which means that Dasein cannot help but take note of them, observe what they are doing, recognize their emotions, react to their mishaps or successes, and so on. When I enter a hotel lobby, I cannot help but notice where the people are, what they are doing, whether they are of special interest to me, whether they please me or offend me. This caring about other humans is solicitude, and is a state of Dasein's being. Thus, the propensity of humans to care about the world is a universal a priori condition of human existence as such. It's impossible to imagine human experience in the absence of care. As Heidegger writes, care, as a primordial structural totality, lies before every factical attitude and situation of Dasein. As Dasein, I can only respond to a situation or form an attitude to something because I already care about it. Dasein is an entity whose kind of being is care. Now, Heidegger analyzes this general existential category of care into three main elements. Number one, the state of mind towards the world evoked by Dasein's being thrown into the world. Second, understanding as the projection of possibilities. And third, the effect of being in the world alongside other persons. Let us first consider Dasein as being in the world and thrownness. One of Dasein's defining features is that it is always being in the world. It is impossible to conceive of Dasein not existing in a world. If Dasein is to exist and have experience, it must be in a world. It must have the ability to relate to things. And, says Heidegger, Dasein doesn't just exist in the world like objects do. like chairs or clocks. Such objects are, in Heidegger's phrase, present at hand along with. Dasein isn't just in the world, it resides in it. It forms relations with the world, is affected by it, worries about it, changes it. As we've already said, Dasein cares about the world. What we have here then is another essential existential condition for Dasein existing at all. For a conscious person to exist, they must exist in a world, and they must be able to relate to that world, to care about it. Being in the world is a state of Dasein, which is necessary a priori. Now, how does Dasein come to reside in the world at all? Quite simply, each Dasein finds itself thrown into the world. It is just there. No Dasein is ever consulted about being born, or asked what kind of world it wishes to inhabit. It just gets pitched into a given situation. This is Dasein's character of thrownness, and how it comes to be that Dasein is being there. Now, as we've noted, Heidegger argues that it's impossible for human consciousness to be indifferent towards being in the world. Dasein is thrown into the world, and the basic attitude it takes to the facticity of being in the world is its state of mind. Dasein's state of mind is its psychological disposition towards the fact of being in the world at all. In Heidegger's more colloquial phrase, Dasein's state of mind is its mood towards the world. Dasein cannot avoid having a mood about its thrown facticity, whether that mood is awe, hope, despondency, or fear. Indeed, its mood or state of mind marks its first conscious recognition that it is in the world at all. A state of mind is an attitude towards being in the world, and Dasein must have an attitude towards being in the world. It cannot be indifferent to the fact of its being thrown into the world. Of all states of mind evoked in humans by the fact of being thrown into the world, the most characteristic for Heidegger is anxiety or dread. Dasein feels anxious about being in the world in general, a world it did not create, in which it must continually choose in the situations which are given to it, where outcomes are uncertain, and in which it might suddenly cease to exist at all. As Heidegger writes, the world as such is that in the face of which one has anxiety. And again, it is not that Dasein first encounters the world and then feels anxious about it. Rather, the world as world is disclosed first and foremost by anxiety, as a mode of state of mind. Secondly, understanding as the projection of possibilities. The second way in which Dasein accords significance to the world is in the form of interpreting its situation and assessing its possible futures and choosing which actions to initiate. While being in the world is the most basic condition for Dasein existing at all, what most uniquely defines Dasein is its awareness that its future is not determined or fixed, but open. At any moment, Dasein conceives that there are different possible actions it can take and courses its life can follow. For Dasein to exist in the world is to exist in a world of possibilities. To conceive its possibility is to project a potential future. In this way, Dasein is always ahead of itself. Dasein believes it is free to select one possibility among those disclosed in a given situation, and by its choices, Dasein shapes its own existence. This is why Heidegger argues that Dasein exists in a way that inanimate objects or animals do not. An object lies inert in the world, and an animal acts according to its species type. But Dasein continually shapes existence by the choices it makes from among its possibilities. Hence, to to quote Heidegger, the essence of Dasein lies in its existence. To exist in a world of possibilities means Dasein always has to choose to do this and not do that. And to choose, Dasein must project itself forward into an array of possible futures, and then select one, converting a potentiality into an actuality, only to open up thereby a myriad of further possibilities. This process of assessing possibilities, projecting futures, and selecting courses of action, Heidegger calls understanding. It too is an existential. To view the world as disclosing possibilities among which I must choose is a necessary condition of human experience as such. Indeed, it is, for Heidegger, the essential defining existential of Dasein. Possibility, he writes, as an existential is the most primordial and ultimate positive way in which Dasein is characterized ontologically. Dasein's freedom is not unlimited. What we can project for ourselves is contingent upon our history, physical capacities, situation, morals, the assumptions of our community, and so forth. Hence, in projecting and acting, Dasein must understand its situation and what are its possibilities. Since Dasein regards its situation in terms of its future possibilities, it perceives and engages with things in order to realize its purposes. Although Dasein is thrown into a world that is merely present at hand, it does not perceive objects as neutral entities which exist for their own sake. Dasein is always formulating goals and things it wishes to do, from opening a door to walking to the shops or putting up a shelf. From this perspective, it views all things in terms of their usefulness in achieving possible goals. It regards the world not as present at hand, but ready to hand. To view things as ready to hand is to view them in terms of their use, to see them as equipment. When I see a piece of brass attached to a door, I don't contemplate it as a shape or piece of metalwork. I regard it as a latch, which I use to open the door. When I see a piece of iron fixed to a stick of wood, I see it as a hammer, and I pick it up to hammer in a nail. The world Dasein inhabits is a network of equipment, of things ready to hand, which are taken up in order to do something. Now, this use approach to the world is primary. The subject-object approach is secondary and derived from the use approach. Even when we enter the natural world, Dasein's first response is to view objects in terms of use: fruit for eating, water for washing, wood for a fire, grass for grazing animals on, hunting. To simply stop and watch the view is a secondary form of experience, and not typical of Dasein's way of being in the world. And it is by using the things that make up our world that we most truly reveal what they are, rather than when we just simply look at them. The less, says Heidegger, we just stare at the hammer thing, and the more we seize hold of it and use it, the more primordial does our relationship to it become, and the more unveiledly is it encountered as what it is, as equipment. Readiness to hand is the way in which entities as they are, in themselves, are defined ontologically, categorically. It follows finally that in approaching the world in terms of its uses, and taking up objects and adapting them to its use, in making tools, clearing roads, building houses and so on, Dasein doesn't merely define its world as ready to hand, it helps to make it. Dasein doesn't just make itself by its choices. In the process, it makes its world. To sum up, Dasein is always in a world. It approaches this world in terms of the projection of possibilities, and objects within the world are accordingly viewed as ready-to-hand equipment. Third, the third aspect of care that Heidegger analyses is Dasein as being with others. Dasein is always being in the world, and this world doesn't only consist of objects that are ready to hand, it also consists, as we have said, of other Daseins. Dasein's being in the world is always along with other Daseins, and indeed the very concept of ready to hand implies the existence of other persons. The tools that are ready to hand are already tools. I exist in a world of tools whose uses are shared with others. This equipment exists for the sake of me and also for others. The light switch that turns on the electric light exists for me because a myriad of other Daseins have designed it, manufactured it, installed it, linked it to the power network, which is in turn run by still more Daseins, and so on. It is impossible to conceive of myself as existing in complete independence of others. So the very concept of ready to hand implies the existence of other persons. The same is true of language. Language is founded upon talk, and talk exists because Dasein lives in a world with other Daseins, and inherits a system of discourse when it enters the world. Thus we arrive at another necessary existential definition of what it means for a human being to exist, namely, to exist with others. The world of Dasein, says Heidegger, is a with world. Being in is being with others. In other words, it is not that a Dasein exists as an independent being and happens to come upon another Dasein. It is rather that Daseins as such share a common world. Myself is partly defined in terms of the existence of others. So Dasein is always being with others, and therefore it is always concerned with others, which is to say, other Daseins are significant for it, and it cannot help but react to their existence. This particular type of care is solicitude, which means that we recognise other persons and take them into account in the world. How we do this is a contingent matter. I may rush towards someone I see walking towards me along the street and embrace them as a long-lost friend. Or I might think they look shifty and cross the other side of the road. But in neither case am I indifferent towards them. Solicitude is another defining characteristic of what it means for Dasein to exist in the world. Now, this fact carries with it important consequences for Dasein's experience of the world. Dasein is always interacting with others, and in this process it takes its place among the others, such that it loses its own individual existence and becomes part of the they. They, the general public realm of Daseins, forms our world, and we merge ourselves with the they. We take pleasure in what they take pleasure in, read what they read, follow the sports they follow, are shocked by what they are shocked by, and so on. This they, which is nothing definite but which we all are, prescribes the kind of being of everydayness. Hence the they self, the self created and formed by society, is another necessary part of what it means to be Dasein, since Dasein must interact with and be part of the social system of the world. But this they self is not authentic in itself. It is a socially prescribed self. And I quote Heidegger: "Everyone is the other, and no one is himself. The they, which supplies the answer to the question of the who of everyday Dasein, is the nobody to whom Dasein has already surrendered itself in being among one another." It is for this reason that Heidegger labels this absorption of Dasein into the collective life of public Dasein as fallenness. It is a turning away of Dasein from its unique individuality to lose itself in the common average life and the interests of the they. These then are the three elements into which Heidegger analyses Dasein's basic way of caring about being in the world, namely Dasein as being in the world, being ahead of itself, and being with others. What that means is that to exist as a human being is to, number one, be thrown into a world and always exist within a world. Number two, have a state of mind regarding this fact, of which the most characteristic is anxiety. Number three, exist through the free projection of future possibilities, from which Dasein chooses particular courses of action. Number four, view objects within the world as ready-to-hand equipment for the realizing of objectives. Number five, be alongside other Daseins for whom Dasein has solicitude. Number six, be part of a collective social fabric with other Daseins, the effect of which is to ascribe social roles and to draw Dasein into identifying with the collective they. This is the condition of fallenness. Now this is the existential analytic, which is the chief focus of Division 1 of Being and Time. Now it's important to understand what Heidegger sought to accomplish with his existential analytic of human existence. He was endeavouring to identify the defining characteristics necessary for everyday human experience to exist at all. They were, in other words, aspects of human experience that would apply to all conscious human experience for all people, such that it would be impossible to imagine everyday existence in their absence. Hence, in the manner of Kant, they could be considered necessary a priori conditions for experience. As we've seen, these conditions of experience were summarised by him as care, which meant that being in the world mattered for humans, and that they recognised that they existed alongside other persons, and that within this context they freely chose what they did in order to realise projected possibilities. As such, Heidegger's analysis opened up new ways to understand the human condition in the world. But this was not his ultimate aim. What Heidegger wanted to do was to understand the being of things in general. To do this, he proposed to study the existence of humans, and from whence to derive what it meant to be a human being in the world, and from this to gain insights into being in general. So having arrived at an understanding of human existence, he wished to proceed to an understanding of human being. But for this next step to be taken, it was vital to be quite clear what it truly meant to exist as a human being. Hence his famous distinction between authentic and inauthentic existence. If we are to derive being from existence, it is authentic existence we need to grasp, for it is this that will lead us to the real nature of being. Hence, at this stage, Heidegger engages in further reflection upon what is authentic human existence and the obstacles to its realisation. Now, authentic existence is a possibility, not an actuality. This is because the foremost defining feature of Dasein is that it is continually choosing what to do among a range of projected possibilities. This means that in its existence, Dasein is always ahead of itself. It is always figuring out its next move, and everything in its world is judged according to how ready to hand it is for forwarding Dasein's goals. No sooner has Dasein realised a possibility, but it creates a new one. Thus, Dasein is never an actuality. It is always a possibility. It is always free. But with Dasein's existence as a non-actualized free possibility comes a sense of its nullity. Existing as possibility brings three sources of anxiety for Dasein. First, Dasein's projections are not actual things. They are possibilities only. It is not certain they will be realized. And even if they are, this does not prevent Dasein pursuing yet more possibilities. Dasein always exists in the future and is not grounded in the present. Second, with the freedom of Dasein comes responsibility for choosing what states of affairs to realize among its possibilities. This fact that Dasein is continually choosing what to do, and so by implication what not to do, brings a perennial sense of guilt. For Dasein to be is to be guilty. When Dasein chooses to do one thing, then it is guilty for all the negative consequences of that choice. All realized possibilities, to take a job, drive a car, have a child, write a book, carry with them potential negative effects, and Dasein is responsible for these negative consequences. More serious still, when Dasein chooses to do one among many possibilities, it is simultaneously nullifying all those other possibilities. When I choose to give money to this charity, I don't give it to these other charities. When I choose to become a lawyer, then I will never be a doctor. For every possibility chosen, countless possibilities wither and never become real. Our life is haunted by the thousands of paths not taken. Dasein can never escape the guilt of acts of commission and omission. Third, the ultimate possibility for Dasein is death. When Dasein projects its possibilities, it is always aware that one truly certain possibility is its death, when it will cease to be at all. Dasein is the possibility of the absolute impossibility of Dasein. Man is finitely free. He knows that at some certain but unspecified future date, he will die. Dasein is being towards death. This ever-present prospect of death is always part of Dasein's experience of existence. It is another a priori condition of human existence. This is why Dasein's basic state of mind towards existence is anxiety or dread. From the prospect of death, Dasein learns both its finitude, that Dasein's existence is limited, and its superfluity, that its existence is not necessary, that it was thrown into a world that was already existing and will exist when it is no more. In every moment of its life, Dasein is faced with the possibility that it might die, that it will no longer be in the world that it cares about. This being towards the end brings with it the mood or state of mind of dread. And I quote Heidegger. The state of mind which can hold open the utter and constant threat to itself arising from Dasein's own most individualized being is anxiety. In this state of mind, Dasein finds itself face to face with the nothing of the possible impossibility of its existence. Being towards death is essentially anxiety. Dasein's existence is authentic when it embraces that it is a finitely free being that chooses its own possibilities. Such a being is not actual. It is responsible for what happens and does not happen, and it dwells within the perpetual certainty of its non-existence. The chief obstacle to Dasein's authentic experience of being in the world is the they. As we noted, Dasein is always being with others. This causes Dasein to lose its individual uniqueness by merging its daily existence into the collective world of the they. This is fallenness. What the they does is unburden Dasein of personal responsibility for its own existence. By mingling with others, each Dasein loses its awareness of its own self. One aspect of this losing of oneself in the they is idle talk. Instead of discourse being related to the being of Dasein, it becomes disconnected from reality and swirls between Daseins as gossip and hearsay with no real relation to actual existence. When someone says something about some object or state of affairs, we do not concern ourselves with the object. Rather, we focus on the claims made about it, and we pass on those claims to others. Thus, when someone says they saw X doing Y, we don't investigate the statement. Instead, we pass it on in talk. We say that W saw X doing Y, and so on. The talk becomes disconnected from actual being. And again, I quote Heidegger. And because this discoursing has lost its primary relationship of being towards the entity talked about, or else has never achieved such a relationship, it does not communicate in such a way as to let this entity be appropriated in a primordial manner, but communicates rather by following the route of gossiping and passing the word along. Idle talk is constituted by just such gossiping and passing the word along, a process by which its initial lack of grounds to stand on becomes aggravated to complete groundlessness. Idle talk detaches Dasein from the actual experience of being in the world. Instead, we inhabit a world made for us by idle talk. The news in the media, chat on the wireless, stories in the newspaper, gossip in the pub, the posts we read online, and so on. We mistake idle talk for reality and cease to reflect upon what it actually means for Dasein to be in the world. Another aspect of this is curiosity. Dasein is curious about the world, which is part of care. But when Dasein exists with others, this curiosity becomes distorted, as Dasein is drawn into a relentless quest for the new, the esoteric, the exciting. We no longer want to see what is closest to us in shaping our situation. Rather, we want to see for the sake of seeing, to be distracted, stimulated, amused, to escape our situation rather than understand it. And this in turn leads to ambiguity regarding the true nature of our existence. It is impossible for Dasein to know when what is being disclosed is genuine understanding or what is not. The net result of idle talk, curiosity, and ambiguity is fallenness, which Heidegger considers another definite existential characteristic of Dasein being in the world. What falling means is that Dasein is lost in the publicness of the they. Dasein has fallen away from itself as an authentic potentiality for being itself, and has fallen into the world. Fallenness into the world means an absorption in the being with one another, and insofar as the latter is guided by idle talk, curiosity, and ambiguity. Now, Dasein cannot help falling into the collective life of the they. Indeed, for Dasein, it has superficial benefits, for the problem of existence and the anxiety that goes with it becomes neutralized by a kind of drug, the drug of merging oneself with the they, which relieves the individual of the burden of having to confront what it means to be in the world. In particular, absorption in the they world, allowed Dasein to escape from its nullity. We noted that at the heart of Dasein's experience as a free, finite being was guilt and death. The individual Dasein is continually choosing between possibilities and is such intrinsically guilty, responsible for what happens and what does not happen, and always existing towards death. But absorption in the they mutes Dasein's experience of both. Individual responsibility is dissolved into the responsibility of the they, which is no one's responsibility. I do what they do. My choices are determined by they. My job, morality, religion, pastimes, choices, all somehow are dictated by they, and I just go with the flow. This abdication of personal responsibility for my choices is what Sartre called bad faith. Similarly, death is collectivized into the they, which of course never dies. Yes, we hear about death. Death is all around us in the public sphere. But it's not felt as a possibility for an individual Dasein. It is a commonplace event happening to no one in particular. The they tranquilizes Dasein regarding its own death. In this way, Dasein loses the most powerful insight into what it means to be Dasein, that Dasein is finite, and its own non-existence is a certainty. And I quote Heidegger, "As falling, every day being towards death is the constant fleeing in the face of death. Being towards the end has the mode of evasion in the face of it, giving new explanations for it, understanding it inauthentically, and concealing it." Thus, Dasein, in being in the world with others, cannot avoid falling into the inauthentic collective world of the they. Its inherent tendency to care about the world becomes distorted into caring about the social world of the they, the effect of which is to alienate Dasein from its actual existence as a free projecting being in a ready-to-hand world, so that it identifies its existence with the vague public spirit of the community, seeking distraction, excitement, and meaning through idle talk, gossip, news, and the unusual. However, Dasein is never wholly lost in the they. Two things cause each Dasein to be aware that it is not actually at one with the they, that it is a unique individual, and that it is free to posit its own possibilities. The first is death itself. While absorption in the they dilutes the consciousness of death, it does not obliterate it. Each Dasein knows that ultimately we each die alone. Whatever else we may share with the they, the one thing we cannot share with the they is our own death. No one can die for us. So even when we are lost in the crowd, we are aware that we are individual, unique selves too, that we are not the same as the they. We authentically exist, and this authentic existence signals what it means for us to be. The second is the call of conscience. Again, no matter how much we share in the collective life of the they, there's always a voice inside us that speaks to us alone. It reminds us that we are unique, that we can choose, and that we are always at one remove from the crowd. The voice of conscience is another primordial phenomenon of Dasein. Our conscience is something we have necessarily as part of what it means to exist as Dasein at all. The call of conscience summons Dasein to its own potentiality for being itself. And this it does by the ownmost sense of being guilty. The sense of being responsible for one's actions, of having a sense of right and wrong, are presuppositions of what it means to be as Dasein. What this call of conscience does is speak directly to Dasein as an individual. It is not the public Dasein of the they which it speaks to, but you. In effect, the conscience is the authentic aspect of Dasein calling to the inauthentic. It reminds Dasein of its own unique self. And insofar as this self is awoken, so the individual Dasein feels that the world is uncanny. It feels that it is not at home in the crowd. It is troubled and anxious, that it can and must judge for itself, that it is free and responsible for its actions. Now, the Dasein that keeps hold of its true self and embraces its authentic free existence is said by Heidegger to exhibit anticipatory resoluteness. Now this means that Dasein accepts that existence is futorial, that it exists ahead of itself, always projecting possibilities. This future brings with it the perpetual possibility of non-existence. And in choosing one future over many, Dasein bears responsibility both for making some things happen and for making many more things not happen. Dasein is resolute when it accepts these facts, yet keeps hold of its sense of self and presses on as a free, self-determining being who is responsible for its own existence and is ready to embrace its future, even when that future includes the possibility of death. Anticipatory resoluteness as the form of Dasein's authentic being in the world is summed up by Heidegger as being towards one's own most distinctive potentiality for being. It is important since, once having defined the nature of Dasein's authentic existence in the world, Heidegger can proceed to deduce what it means for Dasein to exist as anticipatory resoluteness, which is to say, what is the ground, what makes possible Dasein's existence as anticipatory resoluteness. This is the meaning of being. The final question Heidegger addresses is, what is the kind of being that provides the ontological foundation for the authentic existence of Dasein? This is the subject of Division 2 of Being and Time. The authentic existence of Dasein is that of a unique individual that exists in a world and forms relations with others, and displays anticipatory resoluteness in the face of future possibilities. Dasein's being is summarized by Heidegger as ahead of itself, already being in a world, as being alongside entities encountered within the world. This existence is experienced by Dasein as care towards the world. This attitude towards experience is Dasein's single most defining aspect. Descartes was wrong, therefore, to say, I think, therefore I am. It is truer to say, I care, therefore I am. Thinking about the world is secondary to acknowledging the world. Now, as we have seen, Heidegger analysed care into a threefold care structure, which was, number one, being thrown into the world, facticity and state of mind. Number two, being alongside others, solicitude and fallenness. And number three, understanding of projective possibilities, free and finite existence. The question now is, what makes such a care structure possible? What is it about the being of Dasein that ensures that it experiences its existence in this way? Heidegger's answer to this question, and thus to the meaning of being for Dasein, is that for Dasein to exist is to exist in time. Dasein's existence is temporal. Time is the horizon within which we can understand what it means for Dasein to be. For Dasein to exist in the world is to exist simultaneously in three states of time: past, present, and future. Heidegger calls these three dimensions of time ecstasies. Past, present, and future are how Dasein experiences time from the perspective of authentic existence. By time, Heidegger does not mean to say that humans exist in time, in the sense that humans exist in a world in which clocks tick and time passes, whether humans exist or not. What he means is that humans experience their world in a temporal way, continually conscious that they have a past, a present, and a future. Dasein has always perceived time in this way, long before clocks were even thought of. And Dasein doesn't experience past, present, and future in a kind of progression. Dasein is always conscious of experiencing these three ecstasies of time simultaneously. Time provides the foundation for each of the three modes of Dasein's care about the world, which were thrownness, being alongside others, and projection of possibilities. First, projecting of possibilities, which is the future. The defining existential of Dasein's being is it continually shapes itself through the choices it makes among an array of possible futures. Dasein, as we've said, is always ahead of itself. The mode of temporality underpinning Dasein's projection of possibilities is, of course, the future. The future already exists for Dasein in the present. For the future for Dasein are its possibilities, and to interpret its situation in terms of possibilities, and to act to realise those that it chooses, is what it means for Dasein to exist in the world. Dasein, then, always exists in the future, because it is always projecting its own possibilities of what it will do. And when Dasein is existing authentically, the future is not something that happens to it. The future doesn't just arrive, it is always present. And what authentic Dasein does is embrace its own future, and not the vague, anonymous future of the they society into which Dasein just drifts, wondering what will happen next, but its own unique future for which it is responsible. Authentic Dasein goes forward towards its own future. Inauthentic Dasein waits for the future to come towards it. Second, thrownness, which is the past. A second aspect of temporality which determines Dasein's understanding of possibilities is the past. The past enters Dasein's understanding of its situation primarily through its consciousness of thrownness. Dasein was thrown into the world, and it is because Dasein retains memory of its past that it is always thrown into the world. And when each Dasein was thrown into the world, it was thrown into a particular world, a particular culture, family, economic situation, gender, or body. Thus, thrownness isn't a once and for all event. We are always thrown into a world, and thus always shaped by our past. Dasein is always in the past, just as it is always in the future. This past experience of Dasein is what shapes its state of mind, its basic mood or attitude towards being in the world as such. The second way the past shapes Dasein's existence is through history. Another of the necessary conditions for Dasein's experience of being as such is that it is historicising. On the one hand, Dasein always exists in the knowledge that it was born into the world, and is conscious that it is being towards death. Dasein's existence is stretched out between birth and death, and it experiences this persistence as a continuum of care about being in the world. Because it always sees itself as located on this continuum, Dasein is always historical. Further, Dasein is always situated in a world which is constituted by the past worlds of Daseins. To understand its current situation and possibilities, Dasein needs to understand its history, not just its own history. Say, I can only project a future as a medic if I've previously trained as a medic, but also the history of the social realm that it occupies, the history of the community that it occupies. What kind of things has its community done? What characteristics does it exhibit? What traditions shape its thoughts and behaviour? Heidegger saw the collectivity of Daseins within which the individual is situated as having an authentic historical character, and referred to the historicising of the community, of a people. This authentic history of a community informs the existentiality of a given Dasein through three aspects. First, heritage, the tradition and ancestry of Dasein's own family and community, and how it came to be as it is. Second, fate, which is the factical situation of the people and the possibilities that were open to it. And third, destiny, which is the future possibilities of a people projected on the basis of its heritage and its fate. The fate, heritage, destiny of a community within which Dasein is located help to form what it means for each Dasein to be in the world. The point is that Dasein always has a world, and that world is grounded in Dasein's being with others, and this being with others has a history and a destiny which shapes what it means for any one Dasein to exist at all as projecting itself forward into the future. Lastly, being alongside others in a ready-to-hand world, the present. The present for Dasein is the world of ready-to-hand things. Things become ready-to-hand for Dasein because it projects possibilities. Dasein has goals, and objects become ready to hand as means to achieve these goals. But once Dasein takes up a piece of equipment, a hammer, a pen, or a saucepan, it becomes absorbed in the use of that equipment. It focuses on using the tool, the way the hammer bangs in the nail, how heavy it is in the hand, how one piece of wood is fixed to another. When this happens, we lose ourselves in the present, and we don't see ourselves as projecting our possible selves. Thus, to be in a world of action and expectation regarding the performance of equipment is to be in the present and not the past or the future. All this makes it inauthentic, since it is not about the self resolutely facing an anticipated future. This future is not considered by the self, which is lost in the routine expectations of given tasks. In this way, the present is a mode of falling. Even so, it is a necessary aspect of what it means to be Dasein in the world at all. Just as Dasein is always existing in the past, in the form of thrownness and history, and in the future, in the form of anticipatory resoluteness and fate, so it is always in the present, in the form of absorption in the ready-to-hand. Thus it is that past, present, and future constitute the temporality of Dasein. This temporality is the foundation for the world inhabited by Dasein. Dasein, as we have said, is being in the world. But what is this world? It is not the world of everyday things as such. Yes, Dasein is in the world consisting of the aggregate of things and other people. Yet this is not the world as it exists for Dasein. Dasein's world is constructed by Dasein out of the world it inhabits, and the basis for Dasein's world is temporality. Dasein's world always contains simultaneously past, present, and future. The world, then, is Dasein's structure of care as founded upon the temporal categories of past, present, and future. Since Dasein simultaneously exists in the past, present, and future, it transcends the aggregate of things within which it is situated to exist beyond the present, both as past and, more important, as future. It is this transcendence of everyday facticity that allows Dasein to have a sense of being a continuous self, and to be able to reflect upon its condition and what it means to be. Thus, Dasein always exists in a transcendent finite continuum of past, present, and future. And it is this temporal dimension which is the horizon for Dasein's experience of being in the world. This, then, is the conclusion to which Heidegger arrives. He set out to interpret what it means for Dasein to exist in the world. The meaning of being for Dasein is care, which means that Dasein is always conscious of being in a world and takes a concerned attitude towards that world. And the ontological basis of care is time. Temporality has manifested itself, he writes, as this basis of care, and accordingly as the meaning of the being of care. In answer then to the question, what does it mean to be a human in the world? Heidegger answers that it means to, first, be thrown into a world alongside things and other Daseins. Second, to possess possibilities of realization. Third, regard the world as consisting of things ready to hand to achieve these possibilities. 4. To advance resolutely with a sense of responsibility towards one's own most future possibilities, including the certain possibility of death. This is the authentic experience of Dasein's being in the world. And what makes this experience of the world possible is time. Dasein's necessary understanding of itself as existing within a world simultaneously consisting of past, present, and future. This is what it means to be a human being. But of course, Heidegger embarked upon the quest to disclose the meaning of human being as the means to a larger question, namely, what does it mean for something to be in general? Heidegger has elucidated the being of the being human. What about other beings? What does it mean for them to be? This question is not answered, for it is here that being and time ends. Although the being of Dasein was meant to be the guide to the meaning of being in general, Heidegger never takes this step. All he can do is suggest that given the pivotal importance of temporality for the being of humans, might it not be the case that temporality lies at the basis of being in general? Does time, he asks, in his enigmatic last sentence, manifest itself as the horizon of being? By horizon, as we have seen, Heidegger means the ground upon which the meaning of a thing is to be understood. Time, he suggests, might be the ground upon which being as being is to be understood. But how exactly this is to be accomplished is left unsaid. This unfinished aspect of Heidegger's project meant that being and time dealt chiefly with what it meant to be a human in the world. This is why it became a founding text of existentialism, though Heidegger always protested that he was not an existentialist, being primarily concerned not with human existence, but with ontology, the underlying being of things. Well, this may be. It does not, however, diminish the profundity of his analysis of what it means to be an existing human being. This will be matter enough for most philosophers, and is why Being and Time was considered such an important text when it appeared, and why it continues to occupy yards of commentary and critique in academic libraries to this day. Thank you.